you please state your name for the record?
Patricia Sikorsky.
What do you do for a living, Ms. Sikorsky?
I'm the lead forensic investigator for the crime lab here in Midlands.
So what do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, my job is sort of like what you'd see on CSI, but a lot less glamorous. My team and I use scientific tests to work backwards to see what the evidence can tell us about a particular crime.
So how are you involved in this case?
Well, I led the bribery investigation. I led the forensic tests into the bribery investigation of Chase Covington.
What specifically were you trying to determine?
Well, I was present when Chase Covington was arrested. When he was arrested, we found a briefcase on his person. My job was to see if that briefcase could also be linked to Avery Bancroft.
So what kind of analysis did you use to do that?
I used a type of testing called mitochondrial DNA sequencing.
Well, before we tell the jury about those tests specifically, I want to go into your background.
Of course.
Could you tell us where you went to school?
Sure. I got my bachelor's in chemistry from Marsh University, and I have a dual PhD in biology and chemistry from Washington University in St. Louis.
What sort of training do you have in DNA sequencing specifically?
Well, I've been studying DNA sequencing since I began my PhD program. I instruct new forensic investigators on how to conduct these tests, and it's also part of the class I teach over at Midland State.
Well, have you ever testified about DNA sequencing in court before?
Of course. It's a part of my job as head of our crime lab.
Ma'am, let's talk about what you did in this case.
Sure.
Now, you said a second ago that your investigation involved a briefcase. Do you think you'd recognize it if I showed it to you?
I would.
Your Honor, may I approach opposing counsel and the witness with what's been marked for identification as Exhibit 1? It's that briefcase. Handing the witness the same thing.
Thank you.
Look. And ma'am, do you recognize what I just handed you?
I do. This is the briefcase collected on Chase Covington's person when he was arrested. I can tell because it's marked here with an evidence tag that I put my initials on.
And just so we're clear for the jury, why isn't it in an evidence bag?
Well, of course it was in an evidence bag until our forensic testing was completed. But now that all of our tests have been finished, it's perfectly okay to handle it with bare hands.
Your Honor, we offer Exhibit 1.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
How did you collect your DNA samples from that briefcase?
Well, I actually brought along a chart to help me explain. It shows the types of testing we conducted and the samples we collected.
Before we show that chart to the jury, could you tell us whether the test you used is standard in your field?
Of course. It's one of the most common tests we perform.
How reliable is it?
Very. We calibrate all of our machines before every test we perform. They all have error rates that are practically non-existent.
Did you have enough information to apply that test in this case?
I did, yes.
And were all of your conclusions reached to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
They were.
Your Honor, could Detective Sikorsky step down to use that chart?
You may.
Thank you.
So how did you collect samples from this briefcase?
So I was primarily looking at samples of hair. Specifically, when I opened up this briefcase, it looked like there was nothing inside. But when I looked more closely, I found 5 strands of hair.
What'd you compare those against?
I compared those 5 strands of hair against samples I collected from Avery Bancroft and Chase Covington.
What kind of testing did you use to compare those samples?
I used a type of testing called mitochondrial DNA sequencing, or mtDNA for short.
So what does this diagram show us?
Well, this right here is a very basic representation of mitochondrial DNA. You might be more familiar with DNA that looks like a twisting ladder, what we call the double helix. That's nuclear DNA. But this is mitochondrial DNA.
So why are there arrows on that diagram?
So when I explain this to my students, I normally tell them to think of a clock. But where a clock has 60 seconds on it, a strand of mitochondrial DNA has tens of thousands of seconds, or points of comparison.
And what about that red portion at the bottom?
So the vast majority of a strand of mitochondrial DNA is exactly the same in every individual. But this section right here is the portion that can vary between different samples. It's testing that portion that allows us to distinguish between different individuals.
So what kind of testing did you perform on that portion of the DNA?
We do a type of test called gel electrophoresis.
What's that?
I know it sounds like a mouthful, but it's actually pretty simple. I normally use the analogy of a coin sorting machine. So a coin sorting machine will sample out your coins into quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies. A gel electrophoresis test will sample out your DNA sample into its different bases.
So what'd you find here?
So when I ran these tests, I found that none of the 5 hairs were a match to Chase Covington.
What about Avery Bancroft?
All 5 hairs I tested were an identical match to Avery Bancroft. You can see that on this tile right here that I'll put on my chalk.
And could you tell us whether you found any hairs that were a match for someone named Mickey Keenan?
No. All 5 hairs I found were an identical match to Avery Bancroft.
To be clear, can your test tell us when or how those hairs got onto that briefcase?
No. My test can't tell you when, how, or why those 5 hairs got into that briefcase. They can just tell you they did.
Was there anything else that you found in that briefcase other than those 5 hairs?
No. When I opened up this briefcase, I saw exactly what you're seeing now. No pens, papers, documents, nothing. Except those 5 strands of Avery Bancroft's hair.
Thank you, Detective. You can sit back down. Your Honor, I have no further questions. Would opposing counsel like me to leave these up or take them down?